Hello anatomy colleagues, this is Dr. Alsop, and in this short orientation video I will be talking with you about the different types of assessment that you will see and need to complete for anatomy. Now some of these assessments are very much part of your typical process, so quizzes and final exams, but there will be some unique things when we're talking specific to anatomy. Okay, for a typical block there are three main types of anatomy assessment. The first will be readiness assessments that occur before every session. There will also be questions on quizzes and final exams. So this will be true for blocks 3 through 5. Instead of questions on the quiz and final exams in block 2, there will be an open book assignment. And don't worry, we will spend so much detail out regarding that. But we're talking kind of big picture here for the whole year. And so in most blocks, there will be these questions on the quizzes and final exams. And then last but certainly not least, there is the always interesting practical. So let's talk about each one of these in a bit more detail. Now, readiness assessments are a typical part of an anatomy session, and these should be completed after pre-work has been completed, but definitely before the session begins. And so all anatomy sessions begin at 8 a.m. So these readiness assessments need to be completed before. And we do not accept late assignments, so please make sure that these end up on your calendar. Now you see here I have in bright red in all caps the word all. And this is really to get the point across that all students must complete the readiness assessments, not just the dissecting team. So every single student, even if you're not dissecting that day. So make sure to schedule these again in your schedule for each block. Now these are only worth 1 point, but they are relatively easy points, and you would not want to miss out on kind of easy points. There will be 4 questions per readiness assessment. They're typically worth 0.25 points each. And these are not participation points. You must get them correct to earn the point. But the good news is that these are open resource. So you can use any resource while you're taking this readiness assessment. And it's really meant to have you engage with material through an assessment format. These questions will be mainly derived from the learning objective materials, and you can find these readiness assessments on Canvas, as you can see here. This is from last year's image, but your website, your Canvas site is pretty similar to this. So you would click on the quizzes and you should see the anatomy readiness assessments. You will also have anatomy-based questions on your quizzes and final exams. So if you have anatomy scheduled in a block, you can expect to see around 2 to 4 questions per session on the quizzes. So if you had anatomy, or you had 1 or 2 anatomy sessions per quiz, you should expect to see that on a quiz. That number varies based on overall coverage, but it's somewhere between 2 to 4 questions. Now, the number of questions on the final exam varies, but there will certainly be anatomy questions on final exams as well. These are multiple choice questions. They are based on learning objective content. So that is kind of key here. If it's not in the learning objectives, it won't be covered. Really, going through those summary slides for each learning objective kind of helps you to figure out those kind of high yield areas in terms of the learning objectives. Now, one of the most common questions we get asked is there going to be images on these quizzes and final exam anatomy questions? And the answer is no. We save all identification-based questions for anatomy for the practical. So while there may be images on the quizzes and final exams, it would not be from an anatomy question. The only exception to having anatomy questions on quizzes and finals will be in block 2. And to allow you to ease into anatomy and the types of questions we will have throughout the year, there will be an open resource assignment rather than having anatomy questions on the quizzes and final exams. And so again, this is to kind of ease you into the types of questions that you will have. Starting in block 3, you will have anatomy questions on the quizzes and final exam. And these questions are very comparable to the learning objective practice questions you can find on the BlueLink website. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. All right, to the big one, practicals. Practicals this year will necessarily be online, not in person. This is being done for a multitude of reasons, but some of those reasons include not being able to sufficiently promote social distancing, the way practicals are typically set up would not allow that. We're doing this because of overtime exposure of the donors during what would need to be a very highly extended time frame for practicals. And so there's quite a few other reasons why we're doing this. Your colleagues last year had online practicals as well, and we think they worked pretty well. So while we do have in-person dissection sessions, we will not have in-person practicals. There will be one practical per block, and we'll only cover structures from that block. So say there wouldn't be any structures from block 2 on the block 3 practical. And these will be image-based questions. So these will be image-based cadaveric images, and they will be identification questions. And we will take very thorough steps to ensure that the images we will use in these assessments show very clearly the pertinent anatomical relationships we are testing. These will be very similar to BlueLink Atlas images, but not necessarily the same BlueLink Atlas images that you're looking at. So again, these questions will be predominantly identification-based questions. So for example, this first one right here, identify the muscle indicated by the arrow. So you would follow that arrow to the muscle it's pointing at, and you would ID it. You would have multiple choices there to pick from, and you would pick the correct one. This will be approximately 75% of the questions on the practical, give or take a few percentages. The other 25% will be more application-based questions. So they'll still include a level of identification. So say in this question, which nerve traverses the foramen indicated by the arrow? So you would still need to be able to identify that foramen, but then you need to tell us, based on your knowledge from lab or from the learning objectives, what nerve goes through that. Another example, which nerve will indicate or will innervate the muscle indicated by the arrow? So you would identify the muscle, and then you would know what nerve innervates it. The only structures you will be asked to identify, so the only structures that will have arrows pointing at them, will be on this list of structures here. And so you can see this is under the required laboratory part. So this is kind of our contract to you regarding what we will ask you to be able to identify. This is an example question with the embedded image. This is very, very similar to what you will see on a practical. So you will have a question, and you will have multiple answers to choose from. One thing I want to note here, we have only veins here as our answer choices, and the question's asking you to identify the vein. This will be very similar to what you will have on a practical. We won't ask you to differentiate between very closely associated arteries and veins and nerves, because it can be quite difficult to tell on an image, and sometimes quite difficult to tell in the lab. So you'll see that you have kind of only veins to choose from when you're asked to identify the vein. So just for fun, the correct answer here is going to be D, superior thyroid vein. We're looking at the thyroid gland right here, and the vein that you're asked to identify is the one that's sitting right here on that superior part of the thyroid gland, so superior thyroid vein. Now, we in anatomy have provided many supplementary resources where you can assess your knowledge and readiness for your actual assessments. These are not required, but we do know students like practice questions and find them useful in their studying and to kind of assess where they're at in terms of their knowledge. So if you're looking at the main page for a session, so this is similar to this is the very first session, anterior neck and thorax. If you're looking at this main page here, you'll see some things that are required, and then you'll see some things that are supplementary. You'll have the BlueLink Atlas images, which are embedded in a lot of these resources, but then you'll also have this link here called self-assessments. And when you click on that, it will take you to a page here that has 3 different types of self-assessments. There will be learning objectives, practice questions, which will be very similar to what you will see on the quizzes and final exams. You will have quiz links, which are a click-to-reveal resource of those cadaveric images that are available here. So these are click to reveal, so it doesn't have the answers there until you click on it. And then lastly, you will have practice practicals, which will ask questions very similar to what you will see on a practical. So this particular resource is really helpful for those quizzes and final exams, and these are really helpful in terms of the practical. All right, excellent. Those are the assessment types in anatomy. Obviously, as we get closer to practical time, we will send a refresher and more details, in addition to reviewing some of the slightly different means of assessing in Block 2 in order to allow you to kind of ease into anatomy. But at least now you have an idea of what to expect throughout the entire year of anatomy. Please reach out if you have any questions, and thank you for your time and attention.